I have the amazing privilege here of being the lead pastor of this amazing house. I'm so thankful for all of you. And I know we have many people missing today, and I just can't wait for the day where everybody shows up at the same time. It'd be an amazing. Somebody said amen, yeah. And we're just excited for this season. We're excited. We're believing for a building. We have been 8 years in the wilderness, wandering, 15 venues. For those of you who don't know our journey, we had a building for years, and it was just over there, actually. If you shop at Costco right there, that was our building. I would preach from the coconut oil aisle, literally. I can't say in fact for sure, but we had a building there. They tore it down and built the Costco. So somewhere you're walking in Costco, you feel something. It's because I had an encounter in that aisle. You're buying your Ziploc bags. I had a visitation in that aisle. You're buying your trash bags. I don't know what it is. Something happened. There was deliverance in that aisle. Let me just tell you, a lot of spiritual activity happened in that location. There's something about location, you know that. All throughout Scripture, location matters. Spaces, environments, and atmospheres matter. Locations matter. There was a location in Jerusalem where Jesus not only died, but resurrected. I've been to these so-called locations. There's something very special about these locations. That's not what we're talking about this morning, but I am excited because at the end of this experience, we are going to have communion together. I believe something special is going to take place in your life. There's always power in communion. There's power when we take and we eat the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. Now, it's not literal blood for all the youngins in the house. At least we don't think it is. But we enjoy taking communion as a family together when we're able to do that, and today is that day. I just got back from Kelowna and Vancouver last week, and man, I'm just so inspired by something, and I'm going to share it, not today, but I believe I'm going to share it in probably in the next several weeks. I just believe there was something that I was a part of. I got to be a part of in Kelowna, British Columbia, a story about a building. And it was a story that I believe connects to our story. A story of the struggle to get to a building, the struggle to get into a very specific building, and the years that it took, and the hopelessness, and the ups and the downs, and the no's, and the no's, and the no's, and the doors closed, and all of a sudden, let me say, let this, you're one moment away from an all of a sudden moment. You're one moment away from an all of a sudden everything changes. You're single, you're like living the single life, the bachelor life, and all of a sudden, your bride walks into the room. You weren't looking for it, you weren't looking for her, but she just appeared. How many want that gift? How many single guys in the house? Any single guys in the house? Don't be afraid to put your hands up. All of a sudden can happen at any moment. And our life literally revolves around this. It revolves around recognizing these transformation moments. Everyone say the word recognizing. That's what we're talking about. What does it look like to recognize God being in our lives in our everyday? What does it look like to recognize God doing and getting our attention in our everyday life? This is the challenge for so many of us, to recognize the voice of God, to recognize where God is, what He's doing, where He's moving. This is the challenge. Our life is a life of aiming to recognize what He is doing, and today to recognize ultimately what He has accomplished, what He has done. For many, today provokes the question, who is Jesus? Who is He? Is He only a prophet? Is He a good man? Was He a good teacher only? Was He one like many of the other prophets that we hear about? Was He just a man? Was He a man that grew up in Nazareth and, his community saw his diapers get changed, and so He was just like them? Was He a man that just did a few cool miracles that couldn't be explained by science? Was He in fact God in the flesh? This is the question that the world is constantly wrestling with. This is the question that we are always going to wrestle with in experience in our life. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Your lifestyle is a reflection of how you recognize or who you recognize Jesus to be. If you only recognize Jesus to be a good God and never recognize him to be a good teacher, a good leader, a good king, a great healer, you miss out on experiencing all of those other things. What you pay attention to, you empower. What you focus on, you enable in your life. And so if you can recognize who he is in all these areas of life and what he wants to do in your life, it will change you forever. This is the goal of every spiritual person in this room. Jesus is constantly asking us this question: who do you say that I am? We see this in Luke chapter 9. Let's go there for a second. Verse 18, Jesus asks his disciples this question. It says when he was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, who do the crowds say that I am? Like, what are the people saying? What's the rumors about me? You know, by the way, Jesus does not ask a question ever that he doesn't already know the answer to. He's just engaging here. What are the crowds? What are your peeps? What are your people? What is your crew? What are the people that you're around? What is social media saying about who I am? So he was asking his disciples, what are the crowds saying about who I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist. Others say Elijah, who was a prophet. And still others that the one of the prophets, that you're one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. I mean, all these rumors, you're one of the prophets that come back to life. Like all these rumors, Elijah, John the Baptist, your cousin. Verse 20, but what about you, he asked. He said, disciples, hey, guys, you're my crew. You're my key people. You're my tribe. What do you say about me? Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, God's Messiah. The anointed one, literally meaning the anointed one that delivers the world. Peter had this understanding. He was the oldest of the bunch. He has this understanding, this revelation. You're the Messiah. You're God's Messiah. You're the sent one that we've been believing for from Genesis to Malachi. The entire First Testament. All the entirety of the Scripture as they knew it then, from Genesis to Malachi. From the minor to the major prophets, every book, the Torah, everything from Genesis to Malachi, it has been prophesied that the Messiah would come. And Peter has this revelation that he is that everybody, that all of us have been waiting for. It matters who you say Jesus is. It really matters. Jesus made this statement to Martha, who he was in John chapter 11, verse 25. In the context of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, which was just weeks before his own resurrection. Weeks before his own resurrection, Jesus comes and raises his friend Lazarus from the dead, who's been in the tomb for 4 days, stinky, wrapped up in grave clothes, and he calls forth Lazarus to come out of the dead. In the same chapter, the same story, the same timeline, Jesus says to Martha, I am the resurrection. He names himself. I am. Everyone say, I am. That's a very important statement. That's how he introduced himself to Moses. I am the resurrection. I am the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And he's like, do you believe this? Do you believe this? I'm introducing myself to you. I just raised your brother from the dead. I'm about to die and be raised from the dead myself. And I'm trying to point you in the direction of, like, if you can believe this now, you will understand what I'm going to do in the future, a few weeks from now. I am the resurrection and I am the life. Literally meaning I always was and I always will be. That's what it means. This is a direct reference to just chapters later in John chapter 14, verse 6, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. He just keeps naming himself, because how you see Jesus, how you recognize Jesus is absolutely vital. What you say about him, what you believe about him, how you view him. But man, this is a challenge. And on this Resurrection Sunday, I want to talk about recognizing resurrection. Write that down if you're taking notes. I want to encourage you, take some notes, jot some notes down, let it absorb through your hands into your spirit today. Recognizing, what does it mean to recognize resurrection? Because it's easy to recognize death. How many, how many glass half empty people do we have in the house? The expression, nobody wants to admit they're a skeptic. Come on, one person's honest. God bless you, God bless you. A few people are honest, everybody else are liars in this house. Glass half empty basically is like you tend to lean more to the negative often. You know, everything's kind of just half empty. Rather than glass half full, how many glass half full people do we have in the house? Now everybody's like, I'm the positive one. Well, it's very easy to recognize negative things. The point is this. It's very easy to recognize grief, pain, right? Trauma. It's very easy to recognize these things. But how many know it can be a challenge in the midst of all that to recognize life on the other side? Like when you're in a dark place, when maybe you're suffering with depression, maybe you're suffering with some sort of mental illness in your life. Maybe it's physical sickness and it's like up and down constantly. You're in that space. It's very hard to hear encouragement sometimes. When you're really discouraged, how many know it can be very hard to receive encouragement? Anybody? Is anybody here today? Like, are you here? Like, is it Resurrection Sunday or is it like Good Friday still? Like, I don't know where we're at in this. But how many know that it can be so hard sometimes when we're in a hard place to recognize hope? When we're challenging, man, there's like something on the other side of victory. That's a very hard thing to recognize. To recognize resurrection, literally is like recognizing the breakthrough, recognizing the victory, recognizing there's a permanent win if you're living in the kingdom. It's the positive always over the negative. It's seeing the miracle on the other side of the struggle. Let me just say it like this. If there was no resurrection, the death would not matter. If there was no death, there would be no resurrection. There is no faith and no gospel if there is no resurrection of the dead. You can read it in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Paul goes through this. There is no gospel if there is no resurrection of the dead. The most important part of the story of our lives as it pertains to our life with Jesus is to recognize the resurrection. Because to not recognize the resurrection is to only see the crucifixion through a foggy, blind lens. The only reason why the crucifixion matters is because of the resurrection. Do you hear this? And I think so many of us get so stuck in the crucifixion of Jesus that we live a life where we can never get into the hope of Sunday. You hear what I'm saying? We stay in the grief. We stay in the darkness. We stay there. We find solace. We find security. We find, some sort of like identity in that place. But listen, Jesus did not stay in a grave. He resurrected on the third day. Now, I'm not discounting and saying you got to go through stuff and you're going to go through pain. But God has never called us to stay there and dwell there. We are there for seasons. We're grieving for seasons. But eventually we have to realize there was a resurrection to give you hope. There was a resurrection to heal you, to set you free. There was a resurrection so that you wouldn't have to stay in the tomb of your own life. I know this is speaking to somebody in the room. To recognize resurrection, we have to move on from death to life in our thinking. And like I said, it's the polar opposite of a glass half empty. Recognizing resurrection is a way of thinking and a way of looking. Now, let me ask you a question. Man, I don't know, maybe this is a husband thing. I don't know if it's a wife thing. But the husbands probably could relate in the room. If somebody asks you, like maybe it's your wife or something, ask, hey, could you go get the mustard in the fridge? How many have opened up the fridge even though it was right in front of you and you couldn't see it? Someone said it was a guy thing. Any women relate to that? Yeah? Any women relate to that? No, you just couldn't see it. I couldn't see, I'm like, okay, there's no mustard. We have no mustard. We're out of mustard. It's literally staring at me in the face, and somehow I don't recognize the mustard. This is the reality of the resurrection. It's staring at you in the face, hope on the other side of your struggle, and we can't recognize that it's there because we're in pain. Trauma has a way of blinding us from recognizing hope. Trauma has a way of blinding us from recognizing faith. Trauma has a way of blinding us from recognizing healing. Trauma, crucifixion, think about it. You have a crucifixion mindset. I am on the cross in my life. Literally, it feels like I am on the cross. I'm in pain. I'm bleeding out. I'm still on the cross. I can barely breathe. It's really hard in those moments to recognize the fact that it's only momentary. And there's a soldier about to drive a spear into your side to conclude this whole mess, and you'll only be in a tomb for 3 days, and you'll resurrect again. It's hard to think that way, even though Jesus himself, fully God, fully man, on a cross, knew what would take place. He still felt the pain. But you know what the Hebrew writer said? It was for the joy that was set before him that he endured the cross. So he had this ability to see joy somehow, to make joy the focus on the other side of the pain. He could recognize his own resurrection coming even in the midst of his own pain. What would it look like for you to recognize your own resurrection about to take place in the midst of your grief and trauma in life right now? It takes a change of mindset, a change of perspective. Are you here this morning? I know the chairs are super comfortable. Maybe you're wishing you'd be watching a movie right now. I don't know, but you're in church. So suck it up. But man, I have this all the time happen to me. Like, I'll go into my pantry in my kitchen. Michelle will ask for something. I'm like, we have none left. And I feel like I searched pretty good. Somehow my wife finds it. Like, let me give you an example of this week. And my kids will testify to this. I have these 2 keys to my back fence. Two separate keys for each door. Okay? So now you know you try to break into my fence. I got 2 separate keys. You don't know which key it is. I got 2 keys. And man, like, I've had it for 3 years. Matt, 3 years? You built my fence. So 3 years maybe? 2, yeah, 3 years. By the way, if you want an amazing fence built for deck, this is the guy right here. Macam Living. Little shout out. Little ad. So I have these keys, and I'm things are melting, so I'm like trying to get in my backyard, and I'm looking for these keys. I can't find the keys. And there's keys that kind of look kind of like the keys, but I know for a fact they're not the keys. And so I don't even try to use the keys. But I'm confident they're not the keys. I've been using the same keys for 3 years. Like, you'd think I would recognize the keys. My wife added another key onto it, which screwed me up a little bit. So she added a 3rd key. It's always been 2 keys. She added a 3rd key onto it. So I'm like, there's no way these are these keys. In fact, these keys don't even look at all like they used to look. So they're not the keys. And so I'm like, we can't get into our own backyard if we don't have the keys. Like, we can never come into our backyard without dismantling the lock again and getting a new lock. We got to find these keys. So for 2-3 weeks, I had tried to find the keys. There's these set of 3 keys on the spot where the keys always are that I never tried, that are guaranteed they're not the keys. My son, yesterday, this is 3 days ago now, I was asking again, guys, we got to find the keys. We got to find the keys. We got to find the keys. Summer's coming. We got to find the keys. My son's like, those are the keys. I'm like, those are not the keys. It's like, those are the keys. I'm like, those are not, they don't look anything like the keys. And there's a 3rd key on them. There's no way those are the keys. My son goes out with my wife and unlocks the gate. And I'm like, how are these the key? I was so perturbed by my own ability to not recognize the keys that I was like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know if it's age, I don't know what the heck's happening to me now, but my son was all like, I'm amazed. Look, I know more than you, Dad. Kind of vibe. All that to say is this. It's like we have the keys to unlock the things that are locked up in our lives in Jesus Christ through his resurrection. And because of our inability to recognize that they're right there, and because we've never tried to use them, we don't know what we're missing. Jesus has made himself available to all mankind. He's like, here, like, enter in. I want a relationship with you. I am the resurrection. I am the life. If you come to me to find life, if you move, if you just try to use the keys, you'll find that it unlocks things that have been locked up in your life. This is about recognizing resurrection. It's about seeing right. Man, when my wife always says this, it's kind of funny. I feel a little bit of shame. Maybe not shame, but a little bit of sadness when she says this, but not really. I don't know. Maybe it's like a little level, little bit, little seed. She'll say to people, she said, like, when I met Sean, I wasn't even attracted to him. It's like she emphasizes that though. But it's kind of good because I mean, when I met her, by the way, I looked like I just got out of prison. I mean, I had like long dreadlocks. I mean, Joe remembers. Like, I didn't look like maybe like when I met her parents for the first time, she was concerned. My wife was concerned. I used to drive up this old beat up 1991 golden Topaz. I had stickers all over it back when stickers were cool to put on your vehicle, by the way. They're not cool anymore. If you put stickers on your car, it's not cool. It was cool in the 90s, not cool anymore. And I put stickers all over my vehicle. Sorry for those of you that have stickers on your vehicle. I haven't seen the parking lot, so I don't know. But it did not look presentable. I had a very my windshield was cracked. My rearview mirror was broken. I had a hole in the floor, so exhaust would come through the floor. I had to wear sometimes like a nursing mask, even though it didn't help me because the fumes were so strong. So imagine dreadlocks and all on the highway in a nursing mask before masks were even mandated, and I'm driving with a mask. I don't look very presentable. You get what I'm saying? Had a little hula dancer on the front. Had like a fur rug that covered the entire so sketchy. The entire back seat of my car. I mean, I had LED lights. I mean, I just had it all. It was like ghetto, but it was cool then somehow. I don't know. At least I convinced myself it was cool. I don't know. I had skull door locks, skull cup holders. I mean, and I was like full-time ministry. You gotta understand. Like I'm not like BC before Christ. This is just what I was. So I'm rabbit trailing here, but anyways, when I met her parents, she was concerned. It's funny because the week before, or it was like the day before I met her parents, she drove my car and it broke. It coincidentally, while she was driving, broke. So when I drove up and met her parents for the first time, I drove up in a different car that I think I had to borrow from my mother. And it's funny because I roll into their driveway, and the first thing he says to Michelle and me is, "Nice car." I'm like, "Thanks." All that to say is my life my presentability in that season of my life maybe stopped her. I don't know what it was, or maybe it was God that veiled her eyes. Because this is what I know to be true. When things are not supposed to be in a certain time, there's a blindness over your eyes. You're not supposed to see. At that point when I met her parents, we were, connecting and stuff, and it was a different time. But before that, she always would say I wasn't attracted to Sean. Now, I say kind of this back in some way. I wasn't attracted to you either. I mean, I kind of was, but I didn't know she was my wife. I didn't have eyes to see she was my wife yet. I could not recognize. This is the journey. I could not because it was the wrong timing. I could not recognize her to be my wife. And God will often hold us back from recognizing certain things in seasons of our life because it's not the time yet. And I want to read this scripture. I want to talk for a few more moments about something that I think is very important. And it's how we begin to recognize resurrection in our life. To go from just recognizing crucifixion. And we're not negating that, because without crucifixion there would be no resurrection. But we're on Resurrection Sunday. How do we recognize resurrection in our life? Number one, write this down. Just start walking. Just start walking. Walking in life. If you want hope, you cannot stay and just sit for very long in your trauma and in your pain. You got to move. Eventually, you got to move. Listen, this is fact. If you are sick in your body and you only ever stay in bed, you will actually deteriorate more. You will backtrack even more. Eventually, you got to get the blood flowing. You got to move around. It's good for your heart. It's good for your brain. You got to do some form of exercise and movement, even if it's 10 minutes, even if it's 20 minutes. Maybe you've been like a vegetable for years in a bed. Like eventually you have to move or it will get worse and worse and worse. You got to move. You got to walk. Luke chapter 24, let's go there. We're going to stay in this story for a little bit, okay? Bear with me. Are you with me? It says this, now that same day. What day? No, but what day was it? That was great. No, thank you for responding. But what day was it? It was the Resurrection Sunday. The same day that we're talking about here was Resurrection Sunday. The same day. What was the same day he was talking about in this, or the writer Luke, who was a doctor, the way he wrote this gospel was very, very intricate and explained things very, very well. He was a doctor. That's how he thought. So he wrote Luke from this vantage point. The same day he's referring to, the same day of the resurrection, Mary and some other women got their spices ready, and they went to the tomb on that day, the Resurrection Sunday, thinking that somehow they would open and remove the 2-ton, stone by themselves in front of the tomb. I don't know how they thought that. And they bring their spices, they bring their oil to anoint the dead body. That was customary. That was what we were going to do. And they go and they arrive at the tomb, and the stone's open. And they're like, what's going on? And they see this light, and they see these 2 angels, and these 2 angels basically say to them, why are you looking for the living among the dead? Or the dead among the living, or the living among the dead? Why are you searching for something dead when you know, and you should know because he told you this multiple times, that he's alive? There was no body. They were freaking out. These angels announced that he had resurrected. He is risen, they said. So she runs back, tells a bunch of the apostles, tells a bunch of the disciples. None of them really believe. Peter runs to check it out. He sees the same scenario, no angels, but he sees the linen folded nicely, wrapped without a body. He's like, what's going on? Maybe somebody took the body. Somebody moved the body. What's happening here? So 2 of the disciples that were in that camp that heard the report now are walking. Now we're in Luke 24. And they're walking, verse 13, on the same day, 2 of these disciples, 2 of them, were going to a village called Emmaus, about 11 kilometers from Jerusalem. Now remember, they walked everywhere. This would be the equivalent of us walking from right here to the Canadian, the one across the bridge, the museum across the bridge. What's it called? Somebody help me. Is that the one? Yeah. It's about 11 kilometers from here. It'd be but take about 2.5 hours. If we all got up right now and left Cineplex and walked across the bridge to that museum, it would take about 2.5 hours, according to Siri. Depends how fast we walked, I guess. So here, picture this. They're walking the same distance. These 2 disciples, they're processing. They're walking. They're on their journey. They're moving. They're not staying in their grief. They're moving. I'm speaking metaphorically here. They're not just camped out in mourning. They're moving. They're moving ahead. They're walking to this place called Emmaus, 11 kilometers from Jerusalem. Verse 14, they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. So imagine this scenario. You're talking about what happened. This guy that we served for 3 years, who taught us all these things, who showed us all these things, who talked about his death and resurrection, now dies, resurrects, but they don't see the evidence of the resurrection, so they're really depressed, and they're sad, and they're talking about, what are we going to do, man? 3.5 years we just spent with this guy, and he's gone. Somebody took the body, but we heard the report from Mary, but, I don't know if we can trust the narrative. I don't know. You can't trust women. Look what happened in the garden. I don't know. I'm just joking. But that's probably what they're thinking. We haven't seen it ourselves, so we can't trust the word. So they're down. They're sad. It says in this passage, they're sad. They're talking about everything that happened in this scenario. And it's funny because I think this is so like all of us in this room. It's I've heard people say to me, Sean, you share all these testimonies of like God supernaturally providing. It never happens to me. And I'm like, oh, really? It never happens to you? You start talking. I'm like, what about that free trip that somebody gave you? What about when you won that contest? Got that free trip. And I start reminding them to recognize all the ways that God has provided for them. They somehow don't see any of that and are comparing themselves to my story. How many have done that before? It's in life. Well, God doesn't do for me what I hear he does for other people. Yeah, he does, but it looks different. And you've not recognized it. The moment you begin to recognize it is the moment you begin to position yourself to advance even further. Stop comparing yourself. Comparison is a calling killer. It will destroy you and everybody around you. Comparing yourself with the next person, their story, their testimony, their journey. Man, it's brutal. Especially in our social media age. Everybody's comparing themselves. Well, I got a 6-pack. Well, I've got an 8-pack. Well, I've got a 12-pack. Look at me. You can see every vein in my body. Like, comparing ourselves is not helpful for anybody. So here they are. They're processing this, and the very person they're talking about shows up while they're talking and walking. And in verse 16, this is what it says. But they were kept, listen to this, from recognizing him. Why were they kept? Think about this. They're talking about Jesus, and they couldn't recognize the resurrected man they were talking about. They were kept. Some versions say their eyes were restrained. Some versions say God kept their hearts from recognizing resurrected Jesus. You know why? Because they were so fixated on crucifixion still. When you have a crucifixion mindset, you cannot recognize a resurrection. They were looking for the crucified Jesus. They weren't looking for the resurrected Jesus. Let me ask you a question. What are you looking for in this season of your life? Think about this for a second. Are you looking for a version of God that existed or was demonstrated in a previous season of your life? Or are you looking for a new version of God? See, they had an old version of God mindset. God does not want to do the same thing he did for you 20 years ago. He wants to do a new thing. Now, it might connect to something specific and be similar, but he's always doing a new thing. And because they had an old thing mindset, they couldn't see the new thing even when the new thing stood in front of them and talked with them. Listen to what happens here. Their eyes were restrained. They did not know him. They were looking for a crucified Jesus, not a resurrected Jesus. And I think this is what crisis does to you. This is what even studies show. Trauma has a way of blinding you from seeing hope. Trauma has a way of blinding you from making good decisions. Trauma has a way of blinding you so much that literally you could be asking for bread. You can be looking for mustard. Mustard is right in front of you, and you physically can't see it. Trauma has a way of doing that. They were in trauma. Some people believe this. Some scholars would believe that it's because they were in trauma, that's why they couldn't recognize Jesus. Now, I believe there's more spiritual depth to that reason since they were kept from recognizing him. But one could look at this and say, oh, maybe it was the trauma. The same thing happened to Mary in John chapter 20, verse 14 to 15. When they went to the tomb, it says she turned to leave and saw someone standing there at the tomb. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. Imagine being best friends with somebody for 3 years. They die, they resurrect, and somehow in 3 days you can't recognize their body. Isn't that mind-blowing to you? There was like a veil over their eyes. It wasn't the time for them to fully recognize. There was a heart turning. There was a process. My wife could not be attracted to me until the appointed time, because maybe we would have moved out of the timeline. That's a word for somebody in the room. You might be sitting next to your wife right now. Ooh, maybe not. Continue on, verse 17. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. The New Living Translation would say it like that. They stopped short. So picture this scenario. They're just sad. Here, the very person they're sad about is walking with them. Imagine the privilege of that. And they're just sad. Yeah, this Jesus guy that we've served for so long, we spent so much time with, we know so well, we recognize him so well. He died, and he said he was going to rise from the dead, but we don't see the evidence of that. We heard the reports of it, but he's not here. And literally, he's right there. How many times do you have the answer right in front of you and you don't see it? You pray, God, like my car broke down. God, please, help me fix this. And somebody pulls over on the side of the road, and somehow you don't recognize that to be God. God never answers my prayer. God, provide for this bill, and then God gives you more hours at work, and you're like, God didn't provide for my bill. Yeah, he did. He gave you more hours at work. Somehow we don't recognize, because we can't just walk. This is part of it. If we're going to recognize the resurrection in our life, we can't just begin to walk. There's another thing we have to do, is that's number 2, write this down. Get into the scriptures. Very important. Get into the scriptures. Things begin to shift when we begin to move into this place. I remember I was living in Alaska, and I was studying this one verse in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, this one verse. And it was the verse where God says, behold, I stand at the door. Jesus says, behold, this is in John's vision, I stand at the door and knock. And as I'm meditating on this verse, I was living in Alaska. I was living actually at a bed and breakfast on the beach. Beautiful. And I was actually praying. I used to go to they had this outdoor spa, like it was a building. And I used to go into that building and pray for hours every day. And I was reading this Bible verse and meditating on this in this spa. And I was praying. And as I was reading, behold, I stand at the door and knock. I heard a knock, knock, knock on the door. Scared me. So I'm thinking, oh, someone's trying to get in or whatever. So I open the door, no one's there. So that's weird. There's like nobody. I live like literally on the beach. Like there's not a lot of people around me. I live beside the National Geographic Eagle Lady. It's like the bird lady in Home Alone, literally. For all the 90s people in the house. But anyways. And so I go back to the scripture. I'm reading it again. I hear it, knock, knock, knock. I get up again. Now my heart's beating a little faster. Nobody's there. One more time. It happened 3 times. The third time I opened the door, this presence came into the room. I could feel the presence of God, and I just began to weep, and I had this encounter with God that changed so much of my life in that moment of my life when I was living there. I say that to say is that when you get into the scriptures, they transform your life. It's not enough just to read, but to study, to meditate, to focus on. And this is what was happening in this storyline in verse 18. Go back to the story, Luke chapter 24. Go back there with me. One of the disciples, there was 2 of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you the only one? Because they were down, they were sad. He's like, why are you so sad? And he's like, are you the only one in all of Jerusalem that has no idea what's happening? Imagine telling the person you're talking about as if you have no idea what's happening. That's like being the guest speaker and meeting somebody in the bathroom, and they say to you, are you excited about the guest today? Yes, I'm so excited, and you're the guest. That's happened to me, by the way. That's why I'm referring to it. It's like, you're excited. Yeah, I'm obviously not recognizable to you. I'm the one that you're talking about. Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem? Like, who does not know the things that have happened here these days? It says in verse 19. What things, Jesus asks? He's just playing along. What things have happened? Tell me about these things that have happened. And they say, about Jesus of Nazareth. They replied, he was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And they say this, what is more, even more crazy, that it is the 3rd day since all this took place. Why is that so important? Because it was the 3rd day. That was the promise. On the 3rd day, I will rise from the dead. And they had seen no evidence of this yet. It's the 3rd day. And we still see no evidence, even though the evidence is standing right in front of them. Man, I know so many people, They want help. They want to move ahead. And they're like, I don't know what to do. And literally the help is right in front of them. And they just can't see it. God sends it in the form of people. God sends it in the form of so many other things. And they just can't see the help that's right available in front of them. They just can't see it. They can't see the mustard in the fridge on the first shelf staring at them. They see everything else around it, but not the very thing they're looking for. Man, what is more, on the third day, this is the third day all this took place, and we still don't have any evidence. Verse 22, in addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early in the morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of your companions, or our companions, went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. Verse 25, he said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Verse 26, such a key part of this passage. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, and later on it says the Psalms. So from Genesis all the way to Malachi, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. So he begins to unpack from Genesis. Now, they had 2.5 hours at least. We don't know at what point Jesus entered into the conversation. But he probably had 2.5 hours, and for 2.5 hours, he did this like exegetical breakdown from Genesis all the way to Malachi of how the scriptures pointed to him suffering, rising from the dead to deliver all humanity. Imagine that. 2.5 hours, 3 hours. He was the professor. Now, remember this, like in Scripture, whenever you see Scriptures mentioned, it's referring to Genesis to Malachi. Always. The First Testament. Not the Old, the First. Technically, it's the First Testament, the First Covenant. And so he is literally expanding upon the Scriptures, and something begins to happen in their heart. They're like, man, I'm coming alive. What is this guy? Who is this guy? Like, how does he know these things? Like, everything's making sense now because their minds were blind. Their minds were shrouded in darkness. They couldn't see the very thing they were looking for standing in front of them. They were blinded. The Scriptures begin to open up their eyes, begin to shift something in their heart. Everything began to change. And it says here in verse 27, like I said, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said and in all the scriptures concerning himself. Imagine all the scriptures that concern him as the coming Messiah who would die and resurrect. He unpacks for them for like 2.5, 3 hours. This is why the scriptures are so important. Now I'll get into a second what it says here regarding what was happening in their heart. Let's go to my third point here. Write this down. I believe not only do we have to begin to walk, and not only do we have to prioritize the scriptures in our life, we have to prioritize communion. Now, I'm not talking about communion like we're going to do in a few moments back there. I'm talking about communion like having community, having union through community with Jesus, relationship. This word communion in the dictionary could be defined as the sharing or exchanging of intimate thoughts and feelings, especially when the exchange is on a mental or spiritual level. If you're married, you have communion with each other, right? You have communion with each other. To have communion with God is to have connection with God, to have an intimate connection with God. An emotional, mental, and spiritual intimate connection with God. This is what we're called to have. Guys, listen, Jesus did not die to give you a religion, to present to you a religion. He died and rose again to present to you this idea of having a relationship with him. It's an intimate communion with him. When we do the act of communion in a few moments, you're going to have communion with God while you do communion. There's a communion in the communion. This is why it's so powerful. We need to prioritize communion. Let's go back to this chapter for a second. We're almost done. Verse 28. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he was going further. So he pretended that he was moving on. Kind of see, you know that Jesus will test you? in life. He will, let's use the word pretend to do things. He'll test you. He'll see where your heart's at. What are your priorities like? He pretended that he was going to continue on and go further, verse 29. But they urged him strongly, stay with us. They were prioritizing, I want to be with you. Something about you, man. There's something in you. I feel something on the inside of me when you're talking about the scriptures. I feel something happening in me. I'm prioritizing fellowship. I'm prioritizing communion. They say, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over, so he went in to stay with them. They showed this desire for communion. Verse 30, when he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks. Listen to this. Took the bread. Kind of sounds like familiar of what he did the very last act before he went to the cross. What did he do with his disciples? What we call the Lord's Supper. He sat down with his crew, his boys, and he broke bread and said, I want you to do this after I'm gone. Do this in remembrance of me. The broken bread broken represents my broken body on the cross, and the wine represents the blood that was spilled out on the cross for the forgiveness of your sin. The broken body represents the healing of your body. The spilled out blood represents the forgiveness of your sin. So I want you to do this act to remember me, to bring me back to the forefront of your focus, because you will be tempted in times of your life to forget. So he's doing this with them. He took bread, he gave thanks, same thing he did with his disciples. He broke it and began to give it to them. Listen to this, verse 31. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. He's like, here's some bread. They eat the bread. He's like, boom. He's like, gotcha, and he disappears. Just vanishes. Imagine that. Where was the revealing? How did they recognize Jesus? When they prioritized communion, when they made him, fellowship, an important part of their journey. In the communion, let's just say this, in communion is revealed the person of Jesus. In communion is revealed the resurrection. In communion is not only revealed the death, but the resurrection. In communion, they recognized this to be Jesus. And they begin to go on their journey. Verse 32, they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Now they realize, man, that's why I was burning. That's why everything was like moving on the inside of me. Like something was up with this guy. The whole time I had no idea it was him. I'm going to have our team just begin to pass out the communion elements in this moment. And I just believe for many people, you're going to have like a veil removed from your sight this morning. That you're going to see this season differently when you leave this building today. In communion, there's the power to unveil and remove the blinders over our eyes when it comes to who he is as a resurrected king. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and those with them assembled together, saying, it is true. It is true. They come back, Cleopas and this other guy, they come back to their whole spiritual family, and they begin to say, it is true. The women were right. Everyone say the women are always right. The women were right. It is true. He is risen. What the women said has taken place. They assembled together. They're saying it is true. Verse 35. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Verse 35 actually says in other translations, he was made known to them in the breaking of bread. And if you continue on in the latter part of Luke 24, I know some of you are distracted. That's totally okay. I'm just talking as we're passing it out. But if you read the last part of Luke 24, you see what happens as this story unfolds. He appears supernaturally. He appears in the midst of all of them, says, peace be still. They're all like, this is a ghost. It's a ghost. They're freaking out. He thinks it's a ghost. Casper, the friendly ghost, is in the room. They're nervous. They're scared. And Jesus is like, guys, look, listen, like, did I not tell you for 3 years what was going to happen? None of them understood anything ever, by the way. The disciples, for 3.5 years, kind of like all of us, right? At times, God tells us the same thing over and over and over again, and we still don't get it, we still don't get it, we still don't get it, we don't do it, we don't do it. Well, this was the disciples. They understood nothing for 3.5 years, most of the time. They're in this moment. He's a ghost. So Jesus says, oh, give me some fish, I'll eat it. Because, ghosts can't really eat fish. So he eats some fish to show them he's not a ghost. And, thank you. And in this moment, you can read it, the last part, I love it. He says, all of a sudden, he opened their mind to the scriptures. All of a sudden, everything made sense. Because when you start to see resurrection, he was showing the holes in his hands, the holes in his feet. He's like, touch them, guys, touch them. I'm alive. I'm resurrected. All of a sudden, everything made sense. Listen, that's why we always say hindsight's 20/20. The moment you encounter hope is the moment where everything previous makes sense in your life. The moment you come into your promise and the thing that is promised to you, all of a sudden, your journey looking back, it all makes sense, like in a road. Like, it just all makes sense. And I believe we're coming into, many of us in this season, it all makes sense type of a season where we're going to look back and say, wow, that's why that had to happen. That's why that had to happen. If everyone has the elements, I want you to hold the body in your hand. This is the representation of the body that was broken for you to heal your body, to set you free. If you have a sickness in this room, we believe in healing. We believe that Jesus can heal your body. If you have an organ failure, if you have some sort of a disease, some sort of a mind issue, I don't care what it is. It's marital, it's relational, it's your job, something's going on. I just believe that in this moment of breaking the body, we have the ability through communing with him in communion to position ourselves to receive a miracle in those areas of our life. So as we take this in just a moment, we're going to believe God to do an amazing thing. And I want us to stand up. We're going to pray as we exit this room. So God, we thank you for the body. We thank you for the blood. God, we thank you for what you're going to do in this moment. As we take it, God, we believe that miracles are going to begin to happen in our life. God, relationally, God, in our career, God, in areas of our life. Maybe there's disease. Maybe there's sickness in our life. I don't know what it is, God. Career struggles, challenges, and finances. I don't know what it is, but God, I pray that on Resurrection Sunday, you would mark this day as a turning point day for many people in this room as we take communion, God, believing that you died on a cross to set us free and to give us a life of fullness, a life of abundance in Jesus' name. And we bless, God, the wine. We bless the juice, God, representing your blood that forgave us of our sin, past, present, and future. And so, God, today we celebrate you by taking communion. Let's take it together. I want you to lift your hands just one last time as we close this morning. Just lift your hands up. Just lift your hands up. We're surrendering this season to you, God, on Resurrection Sunday. We surrender this season to you. Maybe there are people in this room that have never encountered the love of Jesus before. This is your opportunity. You don't want to leave this room without opening up your heart to Jesus. You don't know what would happen to you. Maybe you've been on the fence in your faith. Maybe you've come to church, you've been to church before. You're not sure what would happen to you. Let this day be a day that is the beginning, marks the beginning of a journey for you in relationship with Jesus Christ. All you have to do is say, I'm in. Say, Jesus, I receive your forgiveness. I confess that you are God, that you are Lord, that you were raised from the dead on the third day, and I want you to lead my life. I want you to be the God that changes everything. So I surrender my life to you today. If that's you, I want you to pray this prayer with me. I want everyone to say it with me together. Say, Jesus, I believe you're God. I receive your forgiveness. I want you to lead my life. Save me. Move me into relationship with you. Let this day be the beginning of a new day in my life. In Jesus' name. Amen. If you said that for the first time and you meant it, I want to encourage you before you leave today, talk to one of our team members. Share with them that you are making a decision to step into relationship with God. I want us to, as we close, just pray one last prayer. I want you to pray with me that this would be a season. I want you to agree with me that this would be a season where you'd begin to resurrect, where you'd begin to recognize resurrection hope in your life. That in the midst of your trauma, your pain, that you begin to recognize there is a resurrection around the corner.